Hi, the silence in the boardroom was loud enough to make my ears ring. I wasn't supposed to be in there. Hell, no one was, not at 11:03 p.m., with the lights dimmed and the quarterly projection still flickering on the screen like a half-forgotten ghost. But there I stood, alone in the stale conference air, holding a printed copy of a financial report I was never meant to see. My name wasn't on the distribution list. It hadn't been for months. It quietly started phasing me out, excluding me from key meetings, looping in younger hires who still needed my old templates to function. I'd only found the report because someone, probably the new junior analyst, uploaded it to the wrong shared drive. Rookie mistake, when I'd have caught in my sleep 5 years ago. But now it was just fuel. The numbers were doctored, obviously. Old black lines for projected savings by modernizing logistics operations, my department. Page after page of inflated estimates that made it look like we were hemorrhaging money under my leadership. Fictitious inefficiencies, fabricated deadweight. I traced every manipulated cell back to Craig's initials. And then, halfway through reading, I felt it again, that creeping sensation. Like a presence just behind your shoulder. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe. You always did stay late. Craig's voice drifted in like smoke. Calm, practiced, polished, with a hint of cruelty tucked beneath. I slowly folded the report and turned. He was leaning in the doorway, no tie, sleeves rolled. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were watching me like a snake measuring distance. I suppose you saw it, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the paper in my hand. I said nothing. I didn't need to. He stepped in, slow and casual, as if we were two old friends meeting by accident. You built something great here, Sandra, truly, but the market's evolved. We need agility now. Automation. You understand, I could have laughed, I almost did. But instead I walked past him, brushing his shoulder with just enough pressure to remind him I wasn't small. At the door, I paused. Funny, I said without looking back. You talk about automation like I didn't write half the code your shiny new team still relies on. His silence was confirmation. Back at my desk, I didn't pack up. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply opened the terminal, accessed the old build archive, and began searching for it. I hadn't looked at the Sandra 1974 protocol in over a decade. It was a last resort, a failsafe, a whisper of defiance encoded so deeply that even our lead devs wouldn't know what to look for. It required a physical authentication key, a USB drive I hadn't touched in 15 years. I opened my bottom drawer, still there, wrapped in a velvet pouch like jewelry, and just as I reached for it, my monitor blinked. An incoming message. From Craig Townsend, subject, offboarding your job's obsolete, pack it up. No greeting, no signature, just a line of cold betrayal sent to the woman who once pulled his division out of a $3 million hole with a week's notice and a bottle of cheap caffeine pills. I clicked the message closed, gently set the USB on the desk, and stared at it. I hadn't decided yet, but something inside me already had. By Monday morning, the parking lot outside Logistics HQ was buzzing, only not with people. The trucks weren't moving. Not a single one. They stood in tight rows like soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. Inside, a headache of epic proportions was building. The freight dashboards were blank. The dispatch schedules looped endlessly with spinning icons. And by 9:07 a.m., two separate VPs had called me, the supposedly obsolete employee, because none of the new hires could explain what was happening. I didn't answer. I sat in a cafe across the street instead, latte untouched, watching the chaos unfold through floor-to-ceiling glass. From that distance, it almost looked beautiful, like a machine deliberately grinding itself to a halt. No one had seen me enter the building the night before. No one knew about the key, not yet, but it wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about accuracy. About showing him just how foundational I really was. They wanted automation. They could taste what happens when the system loses the one person who truly understood it. I watched Craig storm out of the building at 9:13, phone pressed so hard to his ear I thought it might crack. He was pacing, snapping at someone, gesturing toward the trucks as if fury alone could jumpstart logistics. Then he stopped, stared across the street, right at me. I didn't flinch. I just raised my coffee cup in a mock toast. The real twist hadn't come yet. That part I was saving. At 9:26, the company-wide alert went out. System anomaly. Infrastructure teams investigating. At 9:29, the app backend went down. Inventory tracking vanished. I knew what they'd do next. They'd try to revert the version history. Undo the system freeze, but the rollback script, it needed a second key. Theirs was digital. Mine was physical, still in my coat pocket. By 10:04 a.m., the calls started flooding my personal number. Unknown, unknown, unknown. Then finally, Craig T. I let it ring, twice, then answered. Good morning, I said sweetly. What the hell did you do? His voice was hoarse like he hadn't slept. Good, I'm sorry, Craig, I thought I was obsolete. You know damn well this isn't funny. The trucks, warehouses, the whole system is dead. What did you trigger? I didn't trigger anything, I said. System just finally realized who wasn't there anymore. He was quiet for a second. Then lower, Sandra, if this is retaliation, you're putting us all at risk. I sipped my coffee. No, Craig, you put yourselves at risk when you decided the architect of your empire was disposable. I need you to come in. We can talk. He meant negotiate. But I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Not until they felt it in their bones that something vital had slipped through their fingers. So I stood, walked calmly to the counter, and paid in cash. No trail. By the time I was halfway down the block, another message hit my phone. From C. Townsend, subject, urgent, what do you want? Now we were getting somewhere. The message sat on my screen like a blinking detonator. What do you want? It wasn't a question. It was a surrender wrapped in panic. He hadn't even bothered with a question mark. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I made my way to the last place they'd ever expect to find me. The basement of the old Fulcrum West facility, long since retired and scheduled for demolition. I still had a keycard that worked on the rusted side entrance, a relic from when I'd spent 16-hour days in there building the system they now called Legacy. Funny word, legacy. They threw it around like a compliment right before they buried you with it. The server in sublevel B wasn't on the grid anymore. That was the point. It ran on backup power, isolated from the cloud-based infrastructure the execs worshipped like gospel. When Craig's team had migrated the mainframe, they'd assumed I let this one die. I didn't. I just made it disappear. I wiped the dust from the screen and booted it up. The fans groaned awake like something undead. After a few flickers, the console opened, and with it the real core, the unpolished, brutalist version of the software. Mine. No dashboards. No animations. Just raw data, pulsing like a heartbeat. I didn't plan to hold the company hostage. That would be illegal, but I did want them to squirm. So I typed 3 words into the command line: begin passive trace if they tried to reboot anything, reroute, override, this would show me. Back at HQ, Craig was scrambling. I knew his type, hyper-confident until cornered. And now he was running out of exits. His shiny young IT lead, Devin, be grasping for answers in a code base written before he could drive. And HR? Probably drafting press statements in case the media caught wind of a sudden logistics blackout. And still, the silence from me must have been maddening. I finally responded at 12:42 p.m. It's not about what I want, it's about what you took without asking. Seconds later, the phone rang again. I let it buzz once, twice, then answered. I'll give you whatever you need, Craig said quickly. Your job, stock, an apology, hell, a press statement. Just walk me through the reversal. I laughed once, sharp. You still don't get it. This isn't a tantrum, it's an education. I don't have time for riddles, Sandra, that's the problem. You had all the time in the world, you just never used it to learn how any of this worked. A beat of silence. Then quieter, almost human, you're right, I underestimated you. That almost got me. Almost, but it was too late for humility. There's a warehouse in Dayton, I said calmly. Check the logs. You'll find a trail of discrepancies leading back to someone on your procurement team, someone who's been running double invoicing through dummy vendors for months. He was silent. I continued, you fired the one person who flagged it. You remember her? Mara, the woman you laid off for excessive sick days after her chemo. Still nothing, just breathing. You ignored that, buried it, just like you tried to bury me. I didn't know. You did, you just didn't care. I hung up. For now, I'd let him stew. The real confrontation was coming, and Craig had no idea that the system wasn't the only thing I'd wired for fail-safes. He wasn't the only name on my list. I didn't go home that night. I didn't sleep. I drove, no destination, just the rhythm of the wheels and the flicker of yellow lights overhead. Rusted rest stop outside Bloomington became my war room. I parked in the back corner, angled away from the cameras, and flipped open my laptop. Craig was trying everything. His tech team had scrambled a patchwork rollback script. It worked for 2 minutes. Then the scheduler looped again. The inventory queue overflowed. Orders began duplicating, deleting, rewriting themselves like the system was hallucinating. They were clawing at shadows. That's when they made the first public move. At 2:14 a.m., the company's internal Slack channels lit up. A pinned message from Craig himself. Due to an unforeseen infrastructure failure, we are experiencing disruptions across our logistics network. We're working around the clock to restore service. We thank you for your patience. No mention of sabotage. No admission of error. Just vague, sterile crisis speak. But in the internal audit logs, buried deep, I saw something else, a name, Chloe Martinez. I hadn't thought about Chloe in years. Bright kid, quick learner. One of the last hires I personally mentored before the restructures began. And now she was in the system logs, querying rollback points I hadn't touched in a decade. Not Devin, not the CTO, Chloe, curious. I rerouted a copy of her session log through my trace protocol. Within seconds, I saw her screen in real time, like watching someone try to decode a landmine. But what caught my attention wasn't her mistakes. It was what she skipped. She bypassed the standard rollback path and tried to access an old shadow config labeled Archive S 1974. That config was locked behind my credentials, and one more thing, a riddle. A test I built in a whiskey-fueled haze of paranoia and pride years ago. The prompt appeared. What cannot be stolen, only given, and once broken? Comes your prison? Chloe didn't even try. She backed out. Smart. But now I knew someone told her where to look, and it sure as hell wasn't Craig, so I texted her. Not corporate chat, not email, her personal number. One she gave me years ago for emergencies. Meet me, 10 a.m. Old River Bridge, no phones, come alone. I sent it, deleted the trace, logged off. She'd show, I was sure of it. And if she didn't, I'd know the answer anyway. 10 o'clock sharp, I stood by the east railing of the bridge, a warm thermos in hand and the winter wind biting through my coat. She arrived 2 minutes later, alone, but not relaxed. Sandra, she said, voice tight, eyes scanning the tree line. Walk, I said, and we moved slowly, steps echoing on the iron beams. Are you doing this? She asked finally. I gave her a sideways glance. What do you think? She hesitated. I think someone is making it look like you are. Interesting. We stopped in the center. I faced her. Who told you about Archive-S? Chloe looked away. Craig said it was legacy code, asked if I could decrypt it. I told him I'd try, but you didn't mention the riddle. Her lips pressed together. No, you were scared. She nodded once. Good, I said. That means you're not lost yet. She looked up, confused. Chloe, I need you to listen carefully. Something is buried inside the logistics kernel. Something you didn't write. I didn't either. Someone is trying to make it look like I did. Her eyes widened. You mean someone else has access to the core? Someone inside. A beat. She whispered. Devon. No, I said. Too obvious. Too loud. Devon's a cover. Whoever it is, they knew about S1974, about Marta, about the date and invoices, and they wanted to flush me out. So what do? I looked out over the water. We bait them. And I smiled, because I'd already started. I knew Chloe was back inside HQ, wired with a keylogger I'd written myself, cloaked under the name of a deprecated printer driver. She moved quietly, playing her part, a loyal analyst trying to stabilize a company on the edge of collapse. She'd trigger no suspicion. No one knew we'd met. No one suspected she wasn't fully on their side, except maybe one person. At 1:14 p.m. I got a ping, not from Chloe. From the trap I'd left behind. An outbound API call from the logistics kernel, masked as a routine timestamp sync. But the payload was anything but routine. It was a binary string, encrypted, elegant, and aimed directly at an offshore server registered in the Cayman Islands. I traced it, decrypted the header, and froze. The request wasn't automated. It was signed by Eliza Maynard, former compliance officer, retired. At least that's what everyone thought. Eliza was sharp, had a knack for navigating gray zones without leaving fingerprints. She and I had butted heads for years over audit protocols I refused to implement, tools that gave executives backdoor access under the guise of emergency oversight. And now she was back. Quiet, hidden, but active. It made sense. Eliza always hated that I controlled the core infrastructure. It made her uncomfortable that one person could freeze the gears with a few keystrokes. She'd pushed for years to decentralize access. Craig probably looked like the perfect pawn. Now the sabotage had a new shape. Eliza wanted me gone, and she wanted to make sure the system would never depend on someone like me again. At 2:07 p.m., Craig called again. I let it go to voicemail. 3 minutes later, Chloe's keylogger fed me something strange. A private Slack channel. Only 3 users, all anonymized. Handles like at Invoice 32 and at Born 44. But one of them, at Vestal 1, typed a command I knew too well. /inject Sandra restore shadow. That command didn't exist. I never built it, but someone wanted it to look like I had. They were staging a reversal. A heroic fix that would end the crisis by blaming me for the shutdown and making someone else look like the savior. And then they'd purge the system of every trace I'd ever written. That's when I made my move. I logged into the Fulcrum West backup node and deployed Mirror Ghost, a protocol so deep it didn't operate inside the logistics system at all. It lived below it, watching, waiting. Mirror Ghost didn't fix anything. It recorded everything. The Slack channel, the fake injections, the altered logs, every attempt to rewrite history. I packaged it into an encrypted archive and uploaded it to 5 separate locations, 1 press contact, 1 whistleblower network, 1 federal agency, and 2 I wouldn't name even under oath. Then I set the trigger. If I didn't manually deactivate the countdown in 24 hours, the files would send automatically. Names, timestamps, IPS, code, receipts. The system was still paralyzed. The trucks were still frozen. But the real fire, it was just starting to catch. At 3:11 p.m., Craig messaged me again. We've had enough. Legal is involved. This is criminal. Sandra, I replied. Then they should be very interested in what Eliza's been doing under your name. 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then nothing. They weren't ready, but I was. By dusk, the air around headquarters had shifted. Not panic, paranoia. The kind that seeps into every glance, every whispered hallway conversation. Chloe told me Craig wasn't speaking to anyone. He'd holed himself in the executive suite with 2 laptops, a bottle of water, and a locked door. Legal had shown up, so had someone from internal risk. But what none of them realized yet was that their real enemy wasn't me. It was the mirror, the one I'd placed directly in front of them. Mirror Ghost had already logged 4 separate attempts to rewrite commit histories. Someone was trying to falsify the timeline to plant proof that I had built the sabotage functions. The code snippets were surgical, mimicked my style. Same indentation, same variable names, same cryptic shorthand I'd used in old branches no one but I remembered. But they made one mistake. They timestamped it 2 hours before the company migrated to Get Secure. Back then, I was still using the old SVN system, one I'd locked with private hash keys. And guess who still had those logs? Me. Immutable, signed, verifiable. They thought they could fake the present. They forgot I owned the past. At 7:02 p.m., Chloe forwarded me a voice memo she intercepted from Devon's drive. It was short, clipped. Female, we control the narrative by Friday. She's unstable. Leverage that, then replace the code, quietly. I played it 6 times. The voice was Eliza's, and unstable, that was rich coming from someone orchestrating a digital coup behind a smokescreen of legal threats. I called in a favor. Wesley Roth, former InfoSec consultant, off the books. We'd worked together years ago to audit third-party breach attempts. He owed me, big, I need a digital fingerprint cross-check. I'll send 2 archives, one is mine, the other is a forgery. He didn't ask questions. By 9:13 p.m., he called back, it's her. Eliza, down to the keyboard layout. You don't fat finger semicolons like that unless you've been using a Kinesis Advantage for 20 years. And she still uses triple colons instead of double. That's her, it was everything I needed. By 9:40 p.m., I composed the email. Not to Craig, not to legal, to the board. Subject, urgent, active deception, fraudulent code attribution, and internal breach of compliance systems. I attached the voice memo, the code fingerprint report, and a decrypted snippet from Mirror Ghost showing Eliza running system-level commands while masked as Craig. I didn't demand anything. I didn't ask for my job back. I just wrote one line, you fired the wrong person. And you're about to promote a saboteur. I sent it, and then I waited, not long. At 10:12 p.m., I received a reply, we'll be in touch, immediately, do not go public. The fear had finally landed where it belonged, on their side of the table. But fear wasn't enough, they wanted silence. I wanted confrontation. And Craig was next. Craig called at 6:02 the next morning. Early, too early. Quiet desperation pulsed behind his voice, the kind a man uses when the elevator cable has already snapped, and he's just beginning to feel the weightlessness of free fall. Sandra, he said, no greeting, we need to meet. Today. You're awake early, I said, sipping coffee from a cracked mug in my car. Something keep you up? You know what, don't play games, you're not in a position to ask for tone control. Silence. Then she didn't tell me everything. Eliza, I said, drawing out the name, she told you enough. Just not that she'd hang you out to dry when things burned. Another pause, where, he asked. I gave him the name of Public Plaza. Neutral, cameras, crowds. I wanted this face-to-face on the record because what was about to happen wasn't a negotiation. When he arrived, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but spiritually. Like someone who had spent the night staring at the ceiling and counting the seconds left in his career. He wasn't carrying a laptop, just a folder. He offered it like a truce. What's that? I asked. The board wants a resolution. Eliza's on suspension. You win. This, he tapped the folder, is a reinstatement offer plus a press release framing the freeze as an internal audit issue. Clean, no blame, no media. You come back in as a hero who helped fix the system. I smiled. Craig, I said, you really don't get it. You don't want your job back. I want a reckoning. It's hardened. I've got legal watching. You go public with any of this, you get buried in countersuits until your grandkids owe interest. Let me tell you how this ends, I said, stepping closer. You accept the board's offer and announce your retirement within 48 hours. No golden parachute, no press conference. Just gone, or I trigger the release. He paled. You wouldn't. I already did. I just haven't lifted the latch. Craig opened his mouth to speak, then shut it. His hand tightened on the folder. A small tremor betrayed him. You were always like this, he said quietly. Always watching, always calculating. I thought I could contain you. You thought I was loyal, I corrected, but you never earned that loyalty. You mistook silence for submission. He looked at me for a long time, then offered the folder again, slower this time. I took it, leafed through the top pages, and tore them in half. We're past contracts, I said. This isn't paperwork. This is blood. As I turned to leave, he called out, what happens to me? I stopped. That depends, I said. If you disappear quietly, you get to fade into obscurity. If not, I turned, looked him dead in the eye. You become the villain in every headline, the architect of the most humiliating collapse in this company's history. I walked away and he didn't follow. Back at the car, I opened my laptop. The timer on Mirror Ghost reads 00:03:17 remaining. Entered the kill code, it accepted. The archive wouldn't send, not yet because I wasn't done. The next 48 hours passed in silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that fills a room after a scream. The kind that hangs heavy over people who have seen something they can't unsee. At 11:00 a.m. sharp on Friday, the company issued a press release. Chief Operating Officer Craig Townsend announces early retirement, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. We thank him for his contributions and wish him well in future endeavors. No cameras, no ceremony, no quotes from the CEO, just a paragraph. Behind the scenes, the logistics systems were stabilizing. Orders resumed, trucks rolled, but something was different. Everyone moved slower, spoke softer, like they were afraid the walls might be listening. Eliza had vanished. Officially, she was on leave pending investigation. Unofficially, her access had been revoked. Her office cleared by security and a quiet group of forensic auditors had flown in under the radar. The cleanup had begun, but none of that mattered to me anymore. I didn't return, didn't walk through the lobby, didn't sit at the same desk I'd held for 3 decades like some statue collecting dust. Instead, I sent one final message to the board. This was never about a job. It was about who gets to erase whom. You made your choice, and I made sure you remembered mine. I included an untraceable download link to the Mirror Ghost archive, encrypted, read-only, time-stamped, irrefutable. A parting gift. It would never go public. But they'd know it was out there. That was the leverage now. That was the silence they would pay for. 3 weeks later, I stood on a rocky coastline in Nova Scotia, the wind cold but cleansing. I had a new name on my rental car, a passport no one would recognize, no plans for what came next. But for the first time in years, I felt light. They had tried to erase me, replace me, turn 30 years into a line item on a spreadsheet, but they failed. Because while they built systems to forget people, I had built one to remember. And when it mattered most, I flipped the switch no one else knew existed, and I watched them freeze. Thanks for watching, you Cubicle Warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.